she mentioned like she didn't want any of her haters with blogs to go see this movie. Luckily, she did not mention anything about her haters with podcasts. So I am.
What's up, nerds? Welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. My name is Patrick Kuhn, alongside my co-host, as always, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
It's going well, man. How are you?
I'm all right. A little bit bummed that I didn't get to do any YouTube stuff last week. My computer was having some problems. It kind of felt weird not doing it. It kind of felt very similar to when we first started doing the podcast weekly, and then we would skip a week, and it was just like, oh, there's just something missing.
Yeah.
And I've been doing the YouTube thing pretty regularly for about a year now, and it just felt really, really weird to not do it. Like, even when I went home for Christmas, I had recorded videos ahead of time, so I didn't even take that much time off for Christmas. So it definitely felt weird not doing it. I mean, it was kind of cool because I got to just hang out with my wife a little bit more. I'm sure she appreciated that, or she hated it. I don't know. It depends on how she really feels about me. But yeah, it was kind of weird.
Well, as you know, I watch every single one of your videos, so there was definitely a noticeable gap in my life as well.
I feel like you're mocking me a little bit, and I don't appreciate it.
No, I'm not mocking you at all, but no, I do not watch every one of your videos. I'm sorry. But I'm gearing up for a work trip this week, actually. So tomorrow morning, I leave for Minneapolis. I'll be in Minneapolis until Thursday night. So it's one of those situations where, you know, it's kind of fun to get to go to a new city and do that stuff. But you'll also know that I'm a pretty big introvert. So having to go to like an all-day meeting like that lasts 4 days, so you have to be on that entire time. It's pretty taxing on me. So we'll see if I'm still around next week to record our next episode.
Yeah, I can't imagine that you would be super comfortable.
No.
I mean, because sometimes you're still awkward towards me, and I've known you for years now. So, I mean, you're one of my good friends. So, yeah, I can't imagine you would be great around a lot of people. But, I mean, you've talked about this before, and I completely agree with you. Like, us talking every week on the podcast has made us better with other people, too.
Yeah, the problem is I've gotten really good at talking about nerdy things.
Yeah.
But typically the people at these meetings are not into the same things I am. It's like, oh, so what's the last movie you saw?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, you saw something last summer. That's good. I go, multiple times a week. No big deal. That kind of stuff. So, yeah, I just got to get in the right mind space. But we'll see if I'm emotionally available to record the podcast next week.
So have you ever gotten this? So sometimes I come on a little too strong. I know that's probably hard for you to imagine, but I'll talk to somebody that I've never talked to before. I'll meet somebody and they'll start talking to me about movies. And then I can actually, like, when I start chiming in, I can, like, their eyes get wide. And, like, I have made them a huge mistake.
No, that has happened to me too. And most recently was at another meeting I was at, and some of my peers were talking about like the TV shows they've been watching on Netflix. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been rewatching Roseanne. And the passion with which I talked about Roseanne outweighed any, like, they were just making casual conversation, and here I am, like, going on and on about this show that's over 20 years old that they probably never watched. And it was I was like, all right, I need to back off a little bit. This is coming on a little weird. So I know I definitely get that. Like, when somebody says something that I can even just relate to a little bit, like, I go with it, and sometimes it doesn't work out so great.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I get that a lot at work. And so I've gotten to the point where, like, if I'm training somebody new, which has been happening a lot, our department is growing constantly, I'll just like try to like pump the brakes a little bit. Like I had a guy that I trained a couple of weeks ago, and he's big into Madden. And so I just really, really had to like not try to scare him away with my intense Madden knowledge, because he was talking to me about Madden Ultimate Team, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. I play it sometimes, but I mean, I play it all the time. Like I literally put way too much time into that this year. But yeah, I just didn't want to scare him away, get the deer in the headlights again.
No, I completely understand that, man.
All right, so first segment that we start off each episode with is what we call What We're Into. So what are you into this week?
So my wife and I finally got around to seeing Game Night, which is a movie that came out last week, which is something that we would have typically gone to see together, but we ended up not being able to see it until this weekend. But I did want to bring it up because I actually enjoyed it. I wouldn't say quite a bit, but it was a fun watch. So if you're not familiar, this movie is about Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams. They play characters named Max and Annie, and they're a married couple that host weekly game nights with their friends. Things get complicated, however, when Bateman's character Max, his brother, played by Kyle Chandler, comes into town and brings back feelings of like animosity and Bateman's character. And through him coming back, he wants to host his own game night with increased stakes, where he puts a car on the line where the winner of this game night gets the car. But it becomes hard to tell the difference between the fictional game and real life when Chandler's character is kidnapped for real due to his untrustworthy profession. And I'll kind of leave it at that because there are a lot of twists and turns in this movie. And if you can't tell already, it is extremely far-fetched and so implausible, and things that happen within the plot are way too convenient. However, it's a lot of fun. So it was really amusing to watch this cast of characters run across the city in one night trying to piece together clues to, at first, win the game and win the car. But by the end of the movie, you know, they're trying to save a life. And sometimes it was hard to get past the absurd nature of it all. But I would say it's really just the cast that sells what's going on. I think a lot of what I enjoyed about this movie came down to the performances and the chemistry of the actors and actresses in this film. So Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams especially were incredibly believable as a fun married couple, and their rapport is so incredibly charming. And at one point later in the film, Michael C. Hall shows up, and that was like seeing a ghost. Like a flood of Dexter came over me whenever he showed up in the movie. And it was almost like an ex-girlfriend. It's somebody that you loved at one point and you hadn't thought about in forever. And then they show up out of nowhere and you hadn't seen him in like 6 or 7 years. And it was a weird feeling. And it makes me wish that he did more things, honestly. Like it's a really bit part in the movie. Like it's not a lot of weight to it. Like he's not funny. He just shows up and he's Michael C. Hall. But it makes me wish that he had more opportunities to be in things. But I mean, as far as humor goes with this movie, it's definitely not the funniest movie I've ever seen by any means, but there are a lot of moments that made me chuckle, and it's definitely at its best when the humor is dark. And luckily there's a lot of this in this movie. So, needless to say, it didn't like knock me on my ass or anything. And like, it's pretty tough to get past some of the convenient plot points. But once you just kind of take it for what it is, it's a really enjoyable film, and it's actually doing pretty well with critics too. I think it's like sitting at an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes or something crazy like that, which, you know, not a lot of R-rated comedies do that anymore. So if you're looking for something to go watch that is just a little bit of fun, go see Game Night.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you with the Michael C. Hall ex-girlfriend comparison, because I've had a lot of ex-girlfriends that I'll see later on, and they'll have awkward beards and are now lumberjacks. So do you think that him not being in stuff is because people soured on Dexter so quickly?
I don't know. I have no idea. Like, I really thought when that show ended that he was going to take off. Because I always thought that, you know, despite the issues that we had with later seasons of Dexter, I always thought that he was a great actor on that show. And he's done some things here and there, but he's just not had an opportunity to do anything with a lot of weight, it seems like. So I would hope that it's not because of Dexter, but who knows? Maybe he's just so identifiable as that character. People don't want to take a chance on casting him.
I think it may also have to do with that terrible Gamer movie. Did you ever see that?
I remember trying to watch like part of it when it came out, and it being so
yeah,
bad,
it's
we
pretty
turned it
stupid.
off.
Like I didn't get through all of it, but it was pretty disappointing because for a while there he was one of those guys that because he's in Dexter and he's so great in Dexter, like I wanted to see if it could blossom into something else. Like if he could start. I mean, this would be kind of a jumping off point for his career. I know he'd been around for a little bit before he got Dexter, but obviously Dexter was his most well-known role, and then it just never happened. And maybe that's because he chose that movie to be one of his other projects. I think that definitely plays a part sometimes when actors or actresses like have this opportunity and they choose poorly. Like he obviously chose poorly. So I don't know, that might have played a part in it. But I mean, I've seen other actors that have done stuff like that and it not completely kill their career, where with his, it seems like his career is pretty much dead.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So definitely disappointing, though. I like him as an actor. So what are you into?
I am into this weird little thing that I did not know was even a thing because I don't really follow Funny or Die or College Humor. I mean, I've seen some of the more famous sketches, like the Will Ferrell landlord stuff, and then there's some Pete Holmes Batman impressions that I do enjoy on there as well. But apparently there's a series, and I say series in quotes, even though I didn't actually do the quotes because Tyler's the only one that can see me. But there's a series called Zack Morris's Trash on their YouTube channel that got released late last year, I think in like October or something like that. But it's actually on Hulu. Like my wife and I found it on Hulu because apparently they have a Funny or Die section on Hulu that, again, didn't know even existed because I don't really follow that website very closely. But basically, for those that don't know, Zack Morris is the main character, kind of the star of that 90s teen comedy / drama Saved by the Bell, which is a show that I watch pretty religiously when I was a little kid. I haven't revisited it just because I have a pretty big nostalgia for it. Plus, even as a kid, I kind of recognized that it was a little ridiculous, and so I'm sure it does not age well, for sure. So yeah, I haven't rewatched it, but it's definitely a show that I watched quite a lot as a kid. I remember coming home from school and it was like Power Rangers, X-Men, and then Saved by the Bell later. Like that was my routine every day after school. So I definitely have a lot of nostalgia for Saved by the Bell. But basically, this show, the concept is pretty straightforward, and the kind of the format of the show is pretty straightforward. Basically, each episode is only like 2 or 3 minutes long, and essentially they take an episode of Saved by the Bell and they cut it together and basically just are trying to prove how psychotic Zack Morris is and how he just like can basically uses people to his own means. And it's really, I guess it sounds weird, and it definitely is weird, but it's really, really funny. It's funny how they interpreted Saved by the Bell and Zack Morris as a character, and it made me laugh every time. And I mean, again, I was a big Saved by the Bell fan, so it was kind of fun to revisit these episodes as an adult and kind of have a different perspective on them. And it's really, really funny how they just kind of tear apart mostly Zack Morris as a character, but also this show and how ridiculous it is. For like example, there's kind of a running gag in this season. They call it season 1, so I'm assuming that they plan on doing more episodes of this, where there are like bit characters in the show that come up in like one episode, but then you never see them again. And in the show kind of theorizes that they just killed themselves because they had to deal with Zach all the time. Yeah, there's like characters. Jesse has like a stepbrother that you see in one episode and then you never see him again. And Zach dates a woman in a wheelchair, a girl in a wheelchair. And they kind of infer at the end of this episode that they're going to continue dating, but you never see her again. And there's a family that lives with Zach's family at one point, and you never see them again. It's kind of funny to look at a show that I watched as a kid and had a lot of nostalgia for, and kind of see it in a different light. And I mean, of course, it's Funny or Die, so it is really funny, the commentary. But basically, it's pretty straightforward. Is they just cut scenes from these episodes and just have voiceover narration to it, and just kind of trashing it. And it's really, really funny. There's only 10 episodes to season 1, and they're only a couple of minutes long, so I think it only took us like 25, 30 minutes to watch the whole season, but it's really, really funny. So if you have any nostalgia or enjoyed Saved by the Bell at all, I would definitely check this out because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I don't think anything you've ever talked about and what we're into could appeal to me less. I remember like watching an episode or two of that show when I was younger, and it was kind of part of that like after school block, but never enjoying it. And I've not obviously revisited it. So yeah, no interest here. Like, I think Saved by the Bell is some bullshit.
I actually think you might enjoy this then, because I mean, they do trash the show quite a lot, and it's very, very ridiculous. Like, if I didn't have nostalgia for it, I would completely hate it too. But yeah, I would definitely say maybe check it out. Like, I mean, the episodes are only a couple of minutes long. Like I said, it literally would only take you like 25 minutes to watch all of them. So if you didn't like the show, I would say that it probably still would interest you maybe a little bit. Maybe not you, Tyler, but in general.
Gotcha. Well, if I'm ever like stranded on a desert island and I've gone through literally every other form of entertainment that I can find, I'll give it a shot.
All right, cool. So our next segment is plainly called Comics. We just read a ton of comics, and we like to spotlight one or two each week. So what'd you read this week?
So if you listened to us in the last few weeks, I don't remember what week I talked about it, but I talked about Kick-Ass #1 coming out. I think it was last week. Could be wrong, though. You're probably not surprised that this week I'm going to talk about Hit Girl #1, because that was another relaunch that Mark Miller has done with his characters, and it's very similar to talking about Kick-Ass, because this is basically just a renumbering with a Hit Girl #1, and they're calling it Hit Girl in Columbia. However, the difference I would say is that with Kick-Ass, that relaunch saw a new person picking up the mantle of the character, and this comic continues to follow Mindy, who is the original and I believe only Hit Girl. So in this comic, Dave Lazuski, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. I can't really remember how it's pronounced in the movie. He's retired from being Kick-Ass, so Mindy is looking for a new sidekick and new battles to fight. And she basically has a chance to do this kind of two birds, one stone style. She travels to Colombia, where she heard that a notorious assassin has been arrested, and she breaks this assassin out of the police van that is transferring him to prison after his sentencing. Once she has him, she forces him to help her using methods I won't spoil here. But, whenever I talked about Kick-Ass #1, you and I talked about our feelings around the Kick-Ass movies. And, I went on record as saying that I liked them more than you, especially the first one. The one problem I would always say that I had with that story, and something that always was kind of in the back of my mind, was that with these movies, it's supposed to be about a normal kid putting on this suit, trying to be a superhero. But by the time that first movie ends, he's flying a jetpack and is mowing down the mob. So obviously not very realistic given the intentions of where the story takes off. But the one thing that I always loved and forgave in this scenario was the idea of Hit Girl. So seeing this young girl spew curse words and violently kill bad guys was always fun. So I was always looking forward to seeing more of her on screen. So I was definitely also, by that standard, looking forward to Hit Girl's relaunch than the relaunch of Kick-Ass. And this comic is definitely not perfect, and it doesn't add a lot of layers to the characters that are introduced just yet, but it's still a lot of fun, similar to the movie, seeing this young girl do and say these terrible things. So this Columbia arc goes 4 issues, I believe, and then Kevin Smith is going to do an arc as well. So I definitely plan to stick around with this one, especially to get to Kevin Smith's arc to see what he does with the character. The art is really good as well. I really like what they did. It's unlike any artwork I've really ever seen, and I wish I would have written down the artist's name to give him credit, but definitely cool stuff there, and the violence is is beautifully drawn, which is weird to say, but yeah, I would definitely check this one out. If you were choosing between Kick-Ass #1 and Hit Girl #1, I would definitely recommend you go with Hit Girl right now, because this issue was a lot more fun and it follows a character that we already know.
So you're going full Miller now, not Millar.
Yeah, I heard somebody else pronounce it Miller since the last time I talked about Kick-Ass, so I'm just going to course correct there. And what I really honestly need to do is just look up a YouTube video where like he says his name or something, because I've heard it pronounced both ways. But yes, I'm going to go Miller at this point.
I'd have a hard time thinking that there is a YouTube video that he pronounces his name, because that's a weird thing
No,
for
like
him to do.
if he introduces himself like, hey, I'm Mark Miller and I wrote this, or, you know, some shit like that. Or like an introduction of him. Like, I'm here with Mark Miller, like that kind of shit.
Oh, you think he would be an asshole and correct the person if they said it wrong?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I'm an asshole. I correct people when they say my name wrong. But that's,
how do people pronounce your name wrong?
Kun?
Oh,
Patrick
woof.
Kun?
Woof, that's close to something not fun. So no, I mean,
no.
I get the same thing. So obviously, my name's Tyler Hunt, and it's pretty easy to make the Mike Hunt joke. So
Yeah.
it's lazy, but it's easy.
Yeah. Cool, man. All right, so
That was weird. All right, what'd you?
yeah, I don't know how to transition from a Mike Hunt joke.
Yeah, me either. What'd you read?
So I read a new Image comic, and honestly, the only reason I read it was because it was a #1 and it was Image, and obviously we love Image, and they have a reputation of really putting out these weird, really well done, interesting comics. And that being said, the beef is definitely not one of those things. Like, this was definitely a swing and miss for Image. Essentially, what it is about is there's this guy who has lived in this town his whole life, and he's kind of been bullied his whole life. His family has worked in this slaughterhouse his entire life, and then he kind of picks up the mantle, unfortunately, and he's basically dead on the inside because he has to kill all these cows, and he's like the guy that puts the bolt into the cows. And they even have which is super, super morbid, like at the slaughterhouse, they actually have like a running total, like a leaderboard of who has killed the most cows. And like this guy is like going up the leaderboard in this company. It's super, super weird and really, really morbid. And essentially the idea is that they put all these chemicals in these cows after they slaughter them to send them off to all these fast food restaurants and stuff like that. And eating all of this beef basically is not good for you, and it turns him into a superhero, which you don't actually see until like the very end. Like, it's kind of, you don't actually even really see it. It's more like kind of inferred that this is going to happen. It's kind of like the Toxic Avenger sort of thing, where like he accidentally becomes this superhero, but he's also like a monster at the same time. So it's kind of interesting. Like, the concept itself, I think is unique, obviously, but the execution of this book is it's just really fucking stupid. Like, really nothing happens in this first issue. The writing is pretty dumb. The artwork is, I don't know what style they were going for, but it just felt really lazy. And just, there's nothing about this book that I would suggest anybody reading. Like, I don't have a whole lot to say about it. Just like, I was super, super glad when I was done with it, just because it was just really, really dumb. Like, after the first couple of pages, I was like, I made a huge mistake. Like, this is not what I wanted it to be at all. It was really dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I love Image to death. Like, they put out some really quality stuff, but then things like this slip through the cracks, and it makes me wonder, like, who thought this was a good idea and who okayed this? Because I would imagine there are a lot of comic creators out there that have great ideas that deserve to be, you know, put to paper and published, but yet we get this. So, like, I don't know, Rock Candy Mountain ended like a month or two ago, and I don't know if that was Kyle Stark's decision or Image's decision, but maybe we could have given them a few more issues, or, some comics that are considered indie comics. Maybe they deserve a bigger platform, but instead we get a comic about a guy who turns into a superhero from eating beef.
Yeah, you forgot what the name of it was, didn't you? For like a second there.
Like meat beef man or something. I don't even remember. No,
it's called The Beef, but I'm not reminding you to suggest that you go out and read it, because please don't. Like, get as far away from this book as physically possible, because it's really, really bad. It's probably the worst comic I've read in a good while.
Is it supposed to be a satire?
I have no idea. I don't know what they were going for. Whatever it was, they did not execute it at all, because it's real dumb.
Bummer, man.
Yeah, for sure. So what is nerd news this week?
So we're flying along here. So nerd news. Did you watch the Wreck-It Ralph 2 trailer?
I did not, surprisingly.
All right. Well, fuck you then. I mean, I knew the answer to that question before I asked it. No, it's called, I think we've talked about it like once it was announced, but it's called Wreck-It Ralph. Ralph Breaks the Internet. It looks good. It looks really good. So I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, it looks like the premise from the teaser is that the arcade owner puts in Wi-Fi. So now they have access to the internet, and they kind of go into the internet and start dicking around. So we'll see what like the actual plot is, I'm sure, sooner to when it comes out later this year. But there were definitely some moments in the trailer that had me chuckling, and I really, really enjoyed Wreck-It Ralph. Like, that's such a fantastic movie that I'm excited to see what they do here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that movie as well. It kind of felt like a Pixar movie, except for it's not a Pixar movie, because it just kind of has that feel to it, that it just has this high concept that I appreciate. Of course, it has a lot of good themes in it, as well as most Pixar movies do. So I'm pretty excited about it. Not excited enough to watch the trailer, obviously, but I'll watch it when I post this for Nerd News.
Cool. So the next story concerns Thor himself, Chris Hemsworth. Apparently, he is in talks to join the reboot, relaunch, whatever you want to call it, of Men in Black. So
this is still happening, I guess.
Yeah, I guess they're not going the 21 Jump Street crossover route anymore. But yeah, I guess they're going to relaunch this, and he's up for it. I really, really hope that it's a comedy, because he's proven a few times now that he has comedic chops. So I hope that that's the route, and it's not like some serious, grizzled alien movie, which I would doubt at this point, because the originals weren't like that. But I think that, he could carry a film like that for sure. And I hate, we talk about some reboots and relaunches that kind of suck and that we don't need. But at the end of the day, isn't Men in Black a comic book? So, I mean, there should be material there, I guess. It's not all about Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. So
I don't really care about these movies. I enjoyed the first one when it first came out, because I was a little kid and I liked Will Smith, and he was in an alien movie, and I liked alien movies. So I enjoyed the first one, and then it jumped the shark pretty quickly in the second one. It got really, really ridiculous, and I pretty much gave up on it. The third one's not too bad. Like, I thought it was a pretty good rebound after the shit show that was the second one, but not enough to kind of save the franchise for me. So I'm not really all that interested in the reboot. It just sometimes, and I know, studios don't give a shit about stuff like this. They just want to make money, and it's an established franchise and all that good stuff. But some things just need to die, and I think this is one of them. So I'm not necessarily excited at all for this.
Yeah, I wouldn't, don't misinterpret me. I'm not by any means excited, but I think that there's a chance with him attached to it. So we'll see what happens there. I agree. I haven't watched the first one in a few years, so I don't know that it holds up for me, but I remember loving that movie. And then, of course, like you said, the second one's not great, and I haven't seen the third one, honestly, since theaters, so I don't really have much of an opinion there. So, yeah. That almost makes me want to revisit the first one to see if it holds up.
It doesn't. I almost guarantee it doesn't.
When was the last time you saw it?
Oh, I have no idea. It's got to be at least 10 years, at least.
Wow, 10 years.
Yep.
All right. Well, you have time to watch Zack Morris on Funny or Die, but it's been 10 years since you watched the original.
It's 25 minutes.
Can't make some time for the original Men in Black. Whatever, man. Cool. So Kristen Wiig is in talks to play the villain in Wonder Woman 2. And that villain is rumored to be
Cheetah.
Cheetah. Yeah. The Cheetah Woman. So yeah, Cheetah. But obviously Cheetah's like the most well-known Wonder Woman villain, I'd say. So it kind of makes sense that would be the route they go. However, I do not know how you pull that villain off in the Wonder Woman universe. Like I just, man, I like the idea of it, and I like Kristen Wiig, and I think that she'd be a cool pick to play a character like that. But I just don't know how you tell that story.
Well, I mean, it's not like the villain in the first one was all that down to earth either.
Yeah, but like this is a cheetah woman hybrid.
Yeah, but it's not any more ridiculous than the first one. Like, I think the first one kind of gets more credit for that because it happens in the First World War, and obviously it has historical basis in that. And I mean, it's a wonderful movie, don't get me wrong. I love that movie, but the ending, that third act is batshit crazy. So
yeah, it is.
I mean, I don't think it necessarily doesn't fit with that. My problem with this news is I just don't see her as Cheetah. Like, she doesn't seem like a superhero villain to me.
Yeah, I mean, I see it. I can see it. She's not done a lot of serious roles, but when she does, like, she's all right. So I don't know. I'm not opposed to it. I think that there are probably other actresses out there that could pull it off as well, but I'm not opposed to seeing Kristen Wiig play Cheetah, I guess is what I'm saying. I think my idea around it is more so like the anthropologist, like discovering an artifact that turns her into part cheetah is, I don't know, man. We'll see. We'll see what route they go. They might not even go that route. I think that there are a few incarnations of the character in the comics, and it could be something where it's just a suit that she wears. I mean, there's a lot of different routes they could go. And I mean, I would say that at this point, I definitely trust Patty Jenkins, so I'm sure that they'll make whatever they need to do work. So the last story is, it was made a big deal this week, and I don't really see what the huge deal is, but Avengers got pushed up a week. So Infinity War went from a March 4th release date to an April 27th release date. And when pressed on it, like why they would move it up, some people thought maybe they were trying to avoid Deadpool 2 a little bit. They said that it was already initially releasing around the world on April 27th, and they just want everybody to see it at the same time, which is probably good from a spoiler standpoint, because there's no way that something wouldn't get spoiled for me in that week between the worldwide release and the US release. So yeah, we'll get to see that movie a week early.
Yeah, obviously we're both excited about that. I didn't really look too much into it, kind of like you. I didn't really feel like that big of a story. Even if it was Deadpool, like even if they were dodging that, like that movie is going to be huge as well. So, I mean, I don't really blame them. I know people will make a big deal out of it because it's Disney and they're dodging something that isn't Marvel. So I don't know. I didn't think that was that big of a deal, though. Moving it up a week is really, I mean, it's cool because we get to see it one week ahead of time than we would have normally. But I never really understood the whole, and I'm sure that there's just logistical reasons for it, but I just never really understood why people in different countries get to see different things at different times. Like, we just saw Annihilation in the theaters, and apparently it's releasing on Netflix in like a week internationally.
Really?
Which is weird. Yeah. I think it's March 12th. It releases in like the UK and other places on Netflix, but not in the United States. So I never really understood any of that kind of crap.
Yeah, that's weird, man.
Yeah, I saw an advertisement for it releasing March 12th, and I was like, wait a second, that movie's still in theaters, and then I looked it up, and it's worldwide. So, like I said, I never really understood why they do stuff like that where they release things on different times. But I mean, it makes sense because there's no way that, like you said, we wouldn't get something spoiled for us in that week span.
Yeah, for sure, man. So that is all I have for nerd news.
All right, so we are flying along for this episode of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. And this particular segment, this is kind of like our main topic. It changes from episode to episode. We reviewed Annihilation last week, and we are going to be reviewing another movie this week. Red Sparrow was just released this past Friday, and it is based on a book of the same name. It was directed by Francis Lawrence, who did, I think, he either did all 4 of the Hunger Games movies or he did the last 3. I can't remember what it is, and I do almost no research for this.
It's the last 3.
Okay, because I couldn't remember if he did the first one or not. Basically, it stars Jennifer Lawrence, which is no relation to Francis Lawrence, as a former Russian ballet star who, in order to take care of her sick mother, must join an elite squad of spies. And honestly, going into this movie, like when I first heard about this movie, like 6 or 7 months ago, basically, and I'm not alone in this, basically it looked like a Black Widow film without being a Black Widow film. Like, that's kind of what they were going for. And at the time, I did not know that it was based on a book. So, yeah, I really wasn't all that interested in this movie because, like I said, it kind of just looked like a Black Widow ripoff. But honestly, the closer we got to it, the more trailers and whatnot that we saw for it, it did kind of look pretty interesting, and I was a little bit intrigued going into this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was intrigued as well. Like, I thought that it was a cool idea, and it gave Jennifer Lawrence kind of a vehicle to join this strong movie heroine movement that's going on in Hollywood right now, which is a great movement for us as moviegoers because it's resulting in some cool movies. But we'll get into the review, and I'll let you know how that turned out. So yeah, I was more excited than I should have been going into this movie.
Yeah, for sure. So, like we do with the episodes, we break our reviews into different segments, and we kind of like at the beginning giving it kind of a general overview. We call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Red Sparrow, even though you kind of spoiled it a little bit just there?
Yeah, sorry to break churn there with our segments, but yeah, basically I alluded to not liking this movie, and that is 100% accurate. So basically it felt like a shell of a movie to me. It has over a 2-hour runtime where it puts a lot of content into its storytelling, but to me, it was all for nothing. This movie lacked any type of soul and came across as just this weird vehicle for Jennifer Lawrence to do a Russian accent for 2 hours. There were a few parts here and there that piqued my interest with the tension that was being created, but overall, it was one of the slowest moving movies I've ever seen in recent memory. I was looking at my watch constantly, and it felt like an hour had gone by, and it had only been like a half hour. So needless to say, like, I'll get into more with the story because that's where most of my problems lie, but I was not a fan of Red Sparrow. Yeah,
so this doesn't really fit with broad strokes, but for some reason when I got to the theater and bought the ticket, for some reason, like I quickly put it in my pocket like I always do, but I thought it said that this movie was rated PG-13, and while I was sitting there watching this movie, I kept thinking to myself, there's way too much titties in this movie for it to be PG-13, and then I kept thinking, like, how many titties are they allowed to have before it's rated R? And then I realized 15 minutes of the movie had gone by, and I was like, that kind of sums up how I feel about this movie, is that I'm thinking about how many titties they're allowed to have before it's rated R. And I went home and I found something else about my wife. She doesn't like the word titty because I told her that exact story, and she's like, please stop saying titty.
Well, that's something that Chrissy and I have in common then, because I'm really getting uncomfortable with you saying the word titty. So
it's disheartening because you both don't enjoy me saying a lot of words, and I'm beginning to think you just don't enjoy when I talk.
No, just the vocabulary you choose.
All right. So basically, I think we're going to be pretty similar as we do with many of our reviews. honestly, I think I might be a little bit more positive than you. I think that this movie had enough potential. I think it had everything, all the ingredients to be a good spy thriller. It just didn't ever get to its full potential. I felt like it wasn't quite as boring as maybe like a movie like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. But for my taste, these spy movies are always called like cloak and dagger type of movies. And for me, with my spy movies, I would much rather have more dagger than cloak. Like, I felt like there was way too much like spy, like espionage, just like, I don't know, trying to be like 2 steps ahead of everybody, and not enough action, not enough actual like plot development. And I don't necessarily need like Atomic Blonde, like action every like 20 minutes or anything like that, and like these huge action pieces. I don't necessarily need that in my spy movies. I just feel like there just needs to be more shit happening, and not like it felt like this movie was always like on the fringe of something dangerous happening, but not a ton of danger actually happens. And it just felt like every time this movie slightly got interesting, it kind of pulled itself back a little bit. And I just felt like I was bored most of the time. Even one of the things that I had heard going into this movie was that the torture scenes were really kind of brutal. And even those felt kind of safe. I know that sounds weird because they are at times a little, I did get a little squeamish occasionally in this movie, but even them, and maybe that's a case of my expectations being a little too high, knowing that there was some torture scenes in this movie, but even the torture scenes seemed kind of safe at times.
I won't spoil anything with the torture scenes, obviously, because we don't want to spoil anything for people who are going to plan on seeing this movie, but during one of the torture scenes, like, people in the audience I was with laughed. So, I mean, I don't think that, like, I think it's more so on them than the movie, but I do think that that's funny that you said that. I hadn't heard that the torture scenes in this movie were crazy bad or anything, but one of them made the people in my theater laugh.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know these people, obviously, that you saw this movie with, but I know that sometimes I have this bad habit when I get uncomfortable laughing, and it has gotten me in trouble. Like, when I was watching Tusk, now Tusk is kind of a funny movie, but when the shit hits the fan, I felt like I was laughing a lot just because it was fucking weird, and I was kind of laughing at how absurd it was. And so I know a lot of people hopefully are like me. I'm not the only crazy person out there, but I mean, maybe that was the case. But yeah, I just didn't think the torture scenes were all that bad. Like, I've read some stuff about this movie. Oh man, like it's just your typical spy movie, but then you get these really brutal torture scenes. So prepare yourself. And then again, maybe it was my expectations were a little too high, that they just didn't seem like all that bad to me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I didn't think that they were too terrible either.
All right, so let's dive right into the story. How'd you feel about Red Sparrow?
So there's a lot flawed with this story, but before diving into all of that, I do want to say this. So I mentioned that leading into it, I thought that this was maybe a platform where Jennifer Lawrence could join all of her peers that are putting out like these movies about strong female characters. And to me, this movie ended up seeming counteractive to that movement. It had the potential to be a platform for her to join her peers, you know, putting a strong female character on screen a la Atomic Blonde, like you mentioned. But instead, it was a role where the main character, the protagonist in this movie, is degraded consistently. You mentioned this as well, and I think that we talked about it leading up to this movie's release. It looked a lot like Black Widow, which I thought was kind of cool because we obviously haven't gotten a Black Widow movie yet, but it was really just her going to whore school, and that's the movie's words, not mine. So I don't know, that left me feeling a little bit uncomfortable, especially with kind of where we're at culturally at this point in time. But as far as the story itself goes, like I mentioned in broad strokes, it felt really empty to me. Never once did I care about any of the characters on the screen, and I never cared or was caught up in which side Dominica was playing, because there's a lot of back and forth in it, like you would expect in a spy movie. To me, that means that this kind of falls under the banner of shallow storytelling, which leads me to another aspect of the story, which is the pacing of this movie. This felt like a 3-hour movie, and I mentioned in broad strokes, I looked at my watch quite a bit, and each time I looked at the time thinking an hour had gone by, it was a half that amount of time. So I never bought into any motivation of any character in this film and was never eager to see what was going to happen next. I don't need every movie I see to be a popcorn movie. Like you mentioned Atomic Blonde, which I think is a pretty cool comparison, because I don't need it to be that movie where it's like John Wick with a girl where she's killing people left and right and involved in gunfights and fist fights and all of that good stuff. But there has to be some type of entertainment value, and in this movie there wasn't any. Apparently being a Russian spy just means that you have to be really good at manipulating people sexually, and that kind of fell short with me. I needed more content and more of an entertainment value with the story.
I'm glad that you brought up that point about it not kind of being that strong female character, because I honestly think, and maybe we're not the ones to necessarily talk about this, but they could have even done it in a way that she could have still been a strong female character if she kind of embraced her sexuality and kind of used that as a tool. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, but she didn't want any part of this whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of made it weird, for sure. That, I mean, it wasn't, I guess she's strong in a way, but she did not embrace it whatsoever. So it's not like her being strong because she's embracing her sexuality and she's using it as a tool. She's being strong because she's put in this really just extraordinarily shitty situation, and she makes the best of it. But even then, it kind of felt sleazy.
You talked about embracing it or not embracing it. There was the weird point in the story where you see her at the school where she's learning those things, and she has a peer in her class, the lady with the weird haircut, that you almost start to think is going to be a bigger character than she is, but you never see her again. But she also doesn't embrace it, and you see her kind of punished for that. But, she's forced to do these sexual things in front of the class and can't do it, and it's just a weird part of the movie for me. It made me super uncomfortable.
I can agree with that, because I was in the theater with a bunch of really old people, and that was super, super awkward to sit there. It was like I was watching this really sexual movie with my grandparents. So it was super, super awkward. But yeah, as far as the story is concerned on my side, I agree with a lot of what you said, especially about the runtime. Like, I was watching looking at my watch quite a lot in this movie. And I'll just kind of go from the beginning of the movie. I honestly thought that they were going to go really predictable with the accident. Like, we're going to eventually find out that it was her uncle that staged the whole thing and all this other stuff. And I kind of applaud them for not going that route. But at the same time, the accident, like, you just knew eventually something was going to happen. And so it was predictable in that sense. And I don't even know how to describe it, because it does play a huge part. Like, Joel Egerton's character in this movie does play a huge role in the movie, but at one point he essentially almost gets caught in Russia at the very beginning of the movie, and he has to flee, and he goes back to the United States, and they have like these boardroom meetings with him at the CIA where he works, and it almost felt like, first of all, the scenes were super boring. Second of all, it almost kind of felt like they were catching the audience up. Like, it felt like they were explaining the situation. Like, we didn't understand what was happening, so they needed these like boardroom meetings to explain stuff to us, and it just felt really weird and really forced, and I hated that. And then eventually, as you might expect from the trailers and everything, eventually Jennifer Lawrence and Joel Egerton's character team up. And that team up seems super, super flimsy. Like, the mission that they have to team up for, and kind of puts the movie into the third act, really just is flimsy at best. Like, it's really kind of just a really shitty turn in the movie. And I want to talk a little bit about the final twist, and I'm not going to spoil anything, and I'm not going to really talk about it directly, but I just felt like it was the way that they put this movie together was really weird. Like, there's moments in this movie where Jennifer Lawrence or somebody else does something, and you're just like, okay. Like 15 minutes later, you're like, why did we see that? Why did we see this one thing? Like there's a scene earlier in the movie where Jennifer Lawrence, when she kind of has her first meeting with Joel Egerton at his apartment, she like breaks in later and steals this glass. But then that never comes back until like the very end of the movie. I was sitting there and was like, what? Like later in the movie, I was like, okay, when are they going to bring back the glass thing? Like the twist itself at the very end didn't hit as hard because I knew something was going to happen. Like, I'm not going to spoil what actually happens, but there's a couple of moments in this movie. There's like 2 or 3 moments in this movie where that happens. And I'm just like, okay, when's that thing going to come back to the forefront and make sense in this movie? And so I think that they could have done a better job at maybe editing this movie, where maybe in that particular scene that I'm talking about, it's kind of like a wide shot, so you see more of the apartment, but you kind of see Jennifer Lawrence in the middle of the shot, and she picks up the glass. Maybe cut it right before she picks up the glass, like show her kind of reaching for the glass, and then cut it, and then later in the movie, when you reveal the twist, show the whole thing. That way, we're not constantly, at least I was constantly sitting here thinking, when is that going to come back? And so the twist for me didn't hit as hard because I was like watching my watch and I was like, okay, we're 2 hours into this movie. I know something else has to happen because why else would they have this scene? And there was a couple other instances where something like that happened. And I was like, okay, when's this going to come back up? And then it finally came back up and I was like, okay, well, that was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, no, those are good points for sure.
And I just think ultimately it didn't warrant the 2 hour plus runtime. Like they stretched like an hour and a half movie into almost 2.5 hours. And you definitely feel that. You feel every second of that.
Yeah, painfully so. It was almost like somebody was using a skin grafter on me. It was so painful.
That's a nod to the movie. Well done. So performance-wise, what'd you feel about Red Sparrow?
So honestly, you know, as much as I have to say about how much I dislike this movie and the storytelling aspects that I really dislike, the performances are a place where I didn't really have any concerns. I thought that this was a pretty great cast. I just wish that they had more to work with. I thought Jennifer Lawrence did well with the Russian accent, which she's obviously expected to do the whole movie, and being somebody from Louisville, Kentucky, I think that, you know, she
owns Louisville.
yeah.
You ever seen those super billboards?
Jennifer's Louisville in downtown. Oh yeah, man, they love them some Jennifer Lawrence there. But yeah, I mean, she does a great job with the Russian accent and playing the part in this movie, and I really, really like Joel Edgerton. And, you know, I wish that this movie was better for him because he's an actor that at this point, so like I think the last thing he did was Bright, and now he's done this. And unfortunately, he's not picking some great projects right now, in my opinion. But I love him as an actor and as a filmmaker. So I thought that he was great in this movie. And then, you know, other notable members of the cast like Jeremy Irons were really cool to see. I would say that this was the first time I had seen Mary Louise Parker in something since Weeds ended. I'm sure she's done more, but she hasn't been as prominent since when that show ended. And her part is brief, but I guess if I were to complain about somebody, I'd say like she's not great in it. But for the most part, like no complaints from me for performances.
Yeah, her big scene, she's drunk, and she just doesn't play a very convincing drunk.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't like when people try to play drunk. Like, I just don't think that very many people do it very well. Like, I think a lot of people just go over the top, and she kind of, I wouldn't say she necessarily went over the top, but yeah, she didn't play a very good drunk. But yeah, I completely agree with most of what you said. I think Joel Egerton didn't really have a whole lot to work with in this movie, so I think that was a little bit disappointing for sure. I thought he was amazing in The Gift. That movie is fantastic if you haven't seen it already. I will say that as far as the accent's concerned, I think she did a decent job. And I think my big thing with the accents is I can't tell the difference. Like I can't sit here and like, oh, that wasn't Russian, that was Ukrainian or whatever. Like I can't tell the difference. And if you think you can, then you're a pretentious douchebag. But the fact that she was able to keep it the whole movie, at least the majority of the movie. I did hear a few things where it kind of felt like she slipped a little bit, but for the most part, she did keep it through the whole movie. And so that was impressive. I just don't think that we should continue to have American actors or actresses do Russian accents because it just doesn't work very well. So I think we should probably stop having them do that. But I get why she's in this movie for sure because she's Jennifer Lawrence. But I think this movie would have been dreadfully boring. It was already pretty boring, but it would have been excruciating if it wasn't for the performances because that was my favorite part of this movie.
Nope, I completely agree.
All right, so I kind of said this in broad strokes that this movie didn't have as much action in it as I would like, but what do you feel about the little action that was in Red Sparrow?
I mean, I couldn't even tell you a place in the movie that there was really any action. So any action that was in this movie, I've since forgotten. So that should tell you something about how I felt about it, I guess.
Yeah, we've already kind of talked about the torture scene, so we did kind of blow our load a little bit with this particular segment. But I will say that, and I guess it makes sense going back to what you said about it being a very sexualized performance. A lot of the action was very sexual oriented. Like there's a lot of rapey vibes in this movie that made me very uncomfortable. Again, watching this movie with my grandparents. So yeah, it was there was a lot of sexual violence in this movie, which is very awkward given the climate that we're currently in.
Absolutely, man. Like I don't know. Like this movie didn't do very much right, including any type of tension that it was trying to create.
I will say, and I probably should have brought this up in the story, I will say that I was very disappointed with the Sparrow School stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Not only was I disappointed with the content, like you said, they basically say it's a whore school, and that's all it ever is. I expected it to be more like Black Widow, where they taught her fighting stuff too. Like, yeah. I mean, she could be a full-blown spy instead of she just feels like a whore.
Yeah. No, it was really weird. Everybody kept comparing this to Black Widow, and maybe unfairly because all we had seen were trailers, but I would imagine part of spy school would be learning to defend yourself in some capacity with means that weren't just sexual. But yeah, super, super strange movie, man. Super strange.
For sure.
Like, it's just really, really weird. Like the whole school aspect, especially.
Yeah. So what'd you give Red Sparrow as far as a star rating out of 5 stars?
So typically, once I get out of a movie, like I'm pretty high on it, and by the time we do the review, I end up going lower. Or I'm sorry, usually it's the other way around. Usually it's I start off low and go high. But with this, I'm going the opposite way. So when I got out of the movie last night, I thought that I'd probably give it a 2.5. But now that it's marinated a little bit, I'm going to give it a 2 because I really just was so indifferent to this movie. However, I will say this was better than Mother, so at least Jennifer Lawrence is on the upward trajectory in my mind.
So that is 2 weeks in a row that we've mentioned Mother, so let's stop that right now. Next episode, we're going to make a vow that we are not going to bring up that movie
It's just so easy to hate it. It's so easy to hate that movie.
So I'm actually going to go with 2.5 because I think the performances were good enough to kind of carry an otherwise really, really boring story. And I think that if they could cut out some of the fat in this movie, like I said, in broad strokes, I think that they had a potential to be above average movie. But of course, they decided not to do that. And some of the story problems with this movie definitely took it down a notch. So 2.5 for me.
Yeah, it's funny. Jennifer Lawrence was on the Colbert Report. Or not the Colbert Report, the Late Night with Stephen Colbert. And she mentioned like she didn't want any of her haters with blogs to go see this movie. Luckily, she did not mention anything about her haters with podcasts. So I am by no means a Jennifer Lawrence hater. Like I think she's a great actress, but she doesn't have a great track record here lately. So I think she's taken some time off from acting. Some X-Men, The Dark Phoenix, or whatever that movie's called, might be the last time we see her for a year or two.
Yeah, for sure. So I forgot how we end the show for like a split second there. You forgot the name of the comic I was talking about, and I forgot how we ended the show. So we both had kind of little brain farts there. Each episode, we kind of top it off with just kind of a really nerdy question. I feel like nerds have these conversations all the time. What your favorite, whatever the topic is, this particular week? And we take turns choosing the topic, and it is my week to choose the topic. And I thought that it'd be kind of fun to talk about pre-order bonuses for video games, because that's a huge deal. Well, I mean, I guess it's becoming less and less a big deal recently, but it was like they had like a good like 3 or 4 years where it was such a huge deal to pre-order video games, and I thought it would be kind of cool to talk about our favorites. And so for me, while I give you time to think of your answer, for me, there's a one obvious choice, and that is if you ordered The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker on the GameCube, you actually got a bonus disc, which included Majora's Mask, which is kind of a weird Zelda game. I know a lot of people love that game, and I wouldn't say I hate it. I'm kind of indifferent to it. Like, it's a well put together game, but it's not Ocarina or Minish Cap or anything like that. So I do appreciate that you got that, but then you also got a Ocarina of Time Master Quest, which was kind of a harder version of Ocarina of Time, which is kind of ridiculous because that game is one of the hardest games that I've ever played in my life. So to get the harder version of that game is pretty ridiculous. So I thought that was really, really cool way of doing a pre-order bonus. A lot of pre-order bonuses are pretty stupid. Like, I know, like in Halo, I think there was a Halo where you could play as like the sergeant, whatever his name is, like Sergeant Jackson or Johnson or something like that. And like stuff like that doesn't really like interest me, but I think it's pretty cool when they go above and beyond, and I think they did that with Wind Waker, which is good because Wind Waker is like one of my least favorite Zelda games.
Yeah, so just to preface this, I would say like I'm pretty much not a fan of pre-order bonuses, just because like I get it, like you want to give an incentive to pre-ordering the game, but I hate that, especially, you know, some players have an advantage over others because they pre-ordered it. Like I just don't like that kind of stuff. And so for the most part, like I'm not a fan of pre-order bonuses. I will say the one that was the most practical for me was whenever I played The Division. You know, you start off in that game with not a lot, and there was some gun that you got for pre-ordering it that I had that really kind of helped me get further along quicker, just having a good weapon to start out with. But besides that, like I would say my favorite was definitely the Red Hood story pack that you got in Arkham Knight. And what I liked about that as well is, you know, a couple months down the road, like it was made available as DLC to anybody else who hadn't pre-ordered the game. I mean, I guess that game's super old at this point. So spoiler alert, like, you know, Jason Todd is Arkham Knight in that game. But, you know, Red Hood's a really cool character. And one of, you know, the members of the Bat family that doesn't get as much screen time or as much attention, I guess, as you would give like Robin, Batgirl, or Nightwing. So it was cool to have that story pack to play through. It was a lot of fun. So I did like that you got that a little early for pre-ordering the game.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one. Like I said, pre-order is kind of a hit or miss thing for me because I definitely agree with you. And I don't pre-order video games very often because it's you never really know, like with games, like unless it's something that Arkham Knight or Injustice 2 or something like that. I didn't mean to pick 2 Batman games in a row. That was just what came to my mind when I was thinking about it. Like games like that where it's a series and you've loved the other games in the series, then you're definitely going to pre-order that. But for the most part, I've kind of gotten away from pre-ordering video games anyways. But I definitely appreciate your answer. And I think it's definitely something that I'll have to look into, but I'm definitely more cautious about it because video games are so expensive. And when you pre-order something and it's not something that's based in a series that you love, it is always definitely a gamble.
For sure, dude.
All right, so that's it for episode 179 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. As always, we'd appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're on it. Check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And lastly, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.